Hello and welcome to this episode on Reformation. Now, Protestant Reformation is one of the defining moments in world history. When we hear the word Reformation, believers in general, we might assume that it is the time Christian church broke into two due to doctrinal differences, into Catholics and Protestant. However, did you know that Reformation is about the second major split within the church? Roughly 500 years before Reformation, in AD 54, the first major split happened. Now, in this episode, I would like to briefly explain about the first major split that happened in Christendom and the situations surrounding it. I would also present the similarities and differences between the first major split of Christianity and the second major split. This will also help us to understand and locate Protestant Reformation in its larger historical context. July 16, 1054. A delegation sent by Pope Leo IX arrived in the city of Constantinople, carrying an official letter from Pope to the Patriarch or the leader of the church in Constantinople. The messengers, led by Cardinal Humbert, they walked into Hagia Sophia Church, headquarters of the Bishop of Constantinople or the Patriarch of Constantinople. During Divine Liturgy or Holy Communion, this delegation from Rome, they walked up to the front and they placed the official letter from the Pope on the altar of the church. It was the letter of excommunication, means dismissal from the church. The Pope of Rome effectively dismissed the Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael Cerularius, and his followers. Now, this dramatic act was meant as an extreme insult. 4 days later, the Patriarch of Constantinople excommunicated or dismissed the Pope of Rome from the church. With this excommunication, both the church, the Western church and the Eastern church, separated. So this is the first major split. In church history, we call it the Great Schism. Let's roll back a little bit to understand this decisive single event in its proper historical context. On the time of the apostles and the early church fathers, there emerged 5 centers of early Christianity: Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, Rome, and Constantinople. In the book of Acts, we see these 2 major centers, Jerusalem and Antioch, but as time went on, additional centers came to existence. These 5 centers were known as patriarchates, or like archdioceses in our modern terms. And each one of these patriarchates were led by leaders who are known as patriarchs or bishops, archbishops. These patriarchs together led the church at large. They met to discuss and resolve various theological issues and formulate authoritative teachings approved by all the church leaders. We call these gatherings of church leaders as the church councils. Gradually, over time, and Constantinople emerged to be more powerful due to their proximity to the emperors. Before that, let's quickly look at the political backdrop of the situation. Let's start with the political changes that took place in the early 4th century. Emperor Constantine was the first Roman emperor to accept Christianity. Before him, all the Roman emperors were pagans, but some of them actively persecuted Christians, like Nero and Diocletian. But Emperor Constantine was the first Roman emperor to accept Christianity, and he stopped the persecution of Christians with the official decree, which we call the Edict of Milan in AD 313. Later on, this emperor Constantine, he built a new city, a magnificent city in the east, and he called it the New Rome, because Rome was expanding and he wanted to move the capital to the center of the empire. So he found Constantinople to be strategically placed. So he built a new city and he called it the New Rome. In AD 330, this new city was renamed as Constantinople, or the city of Constantine. Few years after Constantine, another emperor came to power. His name was Emperor Theodosius. And Theodosius made Christianity into the official religion of the Roman emperor and banned all the worship of pagan religion within the Roman Empire. And this Emperor Theodosius also divided the entire empire into two along the cultural lines that already existed: Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire. And he gave it to two of his sons. The capital of the Western Roman Empire was Rome, and the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire was Constantinople. Now we see that the western part is predominantly Latin or Roman culture influence was there, and the east side was mostly Greek influence was there. So it is not hard for us to understand how the Patriarchate of Rome and Constantinople become more powerful, since they were in the heart of Roman power centers. However, tragedy struck Rome first. In the year AD 476, barbarian forces, outside invaders, they invaded the city of Rome and destroyed it. And that was the end of the Western Roman Empire. Once the mighty Roman Empire was now reduced to rubble. But the religious influence of Christianity continued to remain strong in the West. Even the barbarians, they embraced Christianity, and the church had a strong grip on the people. On the other hand, Constantinople continued to thrive in the East. From mid-5th century, 13th century, almost 1,000 years, Constantinople was the largest and the wealthiest city in all of Europe, and the home of the Patriarch of Constantinople. And in this situation, we also see the Pope of Rome gradually gaining more and more power and claiming himself to be the successor of Apostle Peter. And he demanded a greater role, the lead role among all the 5 patriarchs. He retitled himself as the Pope, which means the Father. But the East did not accept his claim. The other patriarchs did not accept such unilateral claims to the leadership of the church. Around the 7th and 8th century, the new Islam was spreading around the same time. And it was quickly spreading and taking over the Christian lands. So around this time, we see Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria was quickly coming under Muslim rule. And their influence was gradually diminished. So only last two centers remained, that was Rome and Constantinople. The tug of war for supremacy began between these Patriarch of Rome and the Bishop of Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople. That led to the first splitting of Christian church. I'll share with you the theological backdrop of the situation as well. Now, there were very few but very significant theological differences emerged as well. Of them, the most important one is Filioque controversy. Now, a formal doctrinal statement of the church was finalized during the First Council of Nicaea in AD 325 in the city of Nicaea. All the patriarchs and bishops and more than 300 dignitaries, they attended, and they produced this doctrinal statement, which was accepted by all the church leaders. The Nicene Creed served as a summary of all important theological beliefs of the church. But the Pope of Rome, years later, the Pope of Rome, responding to the Arian heresy within his patriarchate, he inserted a brief clause and the Son into the Nicene Creed. It's not much of an insertion, but it showed very significant theological shift in the understanding. Let's take a look at the original Nicene version here. And we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father. But in the changed version, the Pope added a phrase, and the Son, filioque. It says that we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son. Now, the Eastern patriarchs, the Patriarch of Constantinople and others, did not accept this changed creed. Even today, the Eastern Church, the Nicene Creed of the Eastern Church, reads without this phrase. So they did not accept this changed version or the idea behind it. See, Rome included the phrase and the Son to emphasize the equal divinity of the Son with the Father. Because the Arian heresy tried to explain Son as a lesser being, but the Western Christianity was trying to show the equal divinity of the Son with the Father, so included the phrase. But the East argued that this sending of the Holy Spirit by the Father and by the Son, it made the Holy Spirit subservient to both the Father and the Son, thus undercutting the co-equal Trinitarian relationship. Both churches accused each other of heresy, and to an extent, that controversy continued to accelerate. As I said earlier, even today the Eastern churches use the wordings of the original Nicene Creed, that is, without the added phrase and the Son. But we need to understand this was not a very severe controversy at the beginning. The filioque addition by the Pope was added in the year 589 AD. So the controversy continues to intensify over the course of time, next 400 years, and eventually exploded in 1054. So this church division or the church splitting was long in the making, and there were other theological and cultural differences as well. So let's quickly go over some of the other issues that the Rome and Constantinople had, the Eastern and the Western churches had. In the West, or in Rome, Pope gained more and more power. But in the East, the patriarchs, they worked together under the Eastern Roman Emperor, who maintained a very tight grip over the churches. In the West, Rome used unleavened bread without yeast during communion service. But in the East, in the Constantinople, they used leavened bread to symbolize resurrection and so on. In the West, anyone involved in the religious service of the church must remain celibate. So the Pope, the bishops, all the church workers would be celibate, meaning single, not married. But in the East, they allowed the bishops and patriarchs to marry and to have families. Also, in the Western Rome, they used icons within the church. The veneration of icons were allowed. Veneration means to show respect to the icons. However, in the East, there were times they did not like the veneration of the icons. There were times the icons were removed from the places of worship and destroyed. We call them iconoclasm, iconoclastics. Finally, in the West, in Rome, the language of the church service, the theological discourse was predominantly, it was Latin. But in the East, the language was in Greek. You might remember, New Testament was written in Greek. Early church remained predominantly Greek-speaking church. However, the Rome aspired to play an important role. The Latin Christianity continued to kind of emerged. But East did not change, was not willing to change, or it was not interested to change at that point. The language separation played a very key role in a kind of a key role in this entire split. So all these issues, the political situation, the theological difference, controversies, the linguistic miscommunication between the East and the West, all these led to the first major split within the church. Now, today, Eastern churches and the Western church continue to remain permanently divided, even though they kind of have greater cooperation, but the division had become permanent. There are 200 million Eastern Orthodox Christians today, roughly about 12% of the total Christian population in our world. Most of them, they live in the former Byzantine regions in Eastern Europe, in countries like Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Greece, Serbia, etc. In India, there are 3.8 million Orthodox Christians. Of them, 2.5 million live in the southern state of Kerala. Now, moving on, let's focus on Protestant Reformation as the second major split within the Christian church. Like the Great Schism, or the first major division, discontent about the church practices have been growing for a long time prior to the Protestant Reformation. Like the Great Schism, the theological differences and controversies also had become central in the Protestant Reformation. Like the Great Schism, the Protestant Reformation became permanent division that continues until today. There are also some core differences when we look at the Schism and the Reformation. The Great Schism was directly brought by the actions of two opposing but equally powerful leaders of the church, the Pope of Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople. It was a high-level contest, a fight of the heavyweights. But the Reformation was a bottom-up movement. See, Martin Luther was no way comparable to the Pope in terms of power and influence. He was just a monk, one of these many with a revolutionary idea that eventually shook up the Catholic Church. The language also played an important role in the Great Schism. You see, Catholics prioritized Latin, Orthodox use Greek until today in their worship, liturgy and all. However, Protestant Reformation did not have any centralized choice of language. It brought the Bible into the language of the common man, into every vernacular through Bible translation. Now, the Great Schism also should be seen as a political maneuvering to exert and retain control over the church. But on the other hand, Protestant Reformation was an attempt to free the church from organized oppressive religious structures that became very exploitative. Now, in conclusion, we need to remember when we talk about Protestant Reformation, this refers only to the Western Church, or the Protestant Reformation relates only to the Western Church or the Catholic Church, right? Protestant Reformation did not affect the Eastern Church, or the church that was located in the Constantinople and later on that moved to Russia and Eastern Europe. So the Orthodox churches continued in their own separate line, but the Western Church had this split, which we call the Protestant Reformation. In the next episode, we will focus on the 16th century context of Europe and the Western Church. So please join us in this exciting journey to explore the Protestant Reformation from different angles, different dimensions, so that we can understand the events and appreciate them with greater clarity. God bless you all.